Hello, welcome to the BK Solutions Farmland Ownership Series, Lesson 1.3, where we're going to be looking at comparable sales. In this lesson, we're going to build on 1.2 and take a look at the farm we're comparing it to, either one we're buying or one we already have, with comparable sales in the area. This is something you can pay somebody a lot of money to do, but once you know how to do this, and it really isn't all that difficult once you understand how, you can save a lot of money and do it yourself. Plus, I'm a big believer in landowners understanding exactly what they have in terms of their most valuable asset, which is typically the farm. Let's get started. Okay, let's get started on Lesson 3 of Unit 1, How Much is Your Farm Worth? And we're going to be talking about using your local tax assessor for comparisons. Just a quick review, in Lesson 1 we went over the Illinois Society of Professional Farm Managers and Rural Appraisers data and how you can glean from that. In 1.2 we discussed how to get an idea of how much your farm is worth by estimating your farm's productivity index and getting that information from your farm card. In Lesson 1.3 we will estimate the value of your farm based on comparable sales from your area. Coming up in Lesson 1.4 we will look at the past and future of farmland values. Looking backwards, Lesson 2 may have been more involved than you wanted it to be. However, you must understand this information is important, and through my illustration, if you bought land, theoretically speaking, in 1932 and in the early 1980s, you would have spent 47 of the 100 years in the 20th century just trying to get back to the price that you bought your farm at. Those are pretty brutal statistics. If you bought at the lows, you did quite well. Most people were somewhere in between. But if you're going to be invested in farmland, it's important to understand this information, and I'm showing you how to do it. This lesson, the previous one, will be the most difficult one in my opinion that we will do. You're really going to need to do it to come up with an average productivity index so that we can actually put a value on cash rents. Even if you're doing crop share, it's important to have that cash rent value so you know what to compare it to. Again, if you need help in understanding how to do it, please give me a call. I'll help you to figure out your productivity index. It's very important. I know that it sounds confusing if you're not used to using it. Use the examples. If you don't understand or have some questions or coming up with the values, please let me know. My job here is to help you understand and to do those. I know it's going to take a lot of time or some amount of time, but we're going to go through a lot of lessons. It's just a matter of reading and having the information at your fingertips, so it'll average out in the long run. Hopefully you have a farm without a lot of different soil types on it. That would make things easier. The information from the Illinois Society is great stuff, and I'm glad we have it. However, it really doesn't do a real good job of telling us what's going on in the market locally. Some counties have the information online for comparable sales and some don't. Some have your tax cards on hand online and others don't. Some are really helpful about helping you get this if they're not online, and a few aren't. If you're in a difficult county, give me a call and maybe I can help give some advice on how to get that. If you're thinking of buying a farm, it's a good idea to look up the comparison farms at the assessor's or recorder's office and the farm you're thinking about buying. Or you may be putting together an estate plan, and an accurate value may be helpful. You can pay someone a lot of money to do that work for you, but the basic information that you need to know, you can actually do yourself. And once you know how to do this, you can do it relatively quickly. The bottom line is you need to know what kind of soils you have or what you're going to buy, what kind of soils it has, because that all relates to yield, and yield is the bottom line as to whether it will cash flow for you. Current grain prices are relatively supportive of today's higher land values. The question remains is, what will these farms sell for in the future? For this lesson, our goal is to know where to find the information and look it up. What we're going to be using is Champaign County and showing the data. I went to the tax assessor's site, clicked on farmland sales, selected a year. When I did this example, it was 2011. and I chose Brown Township in June, and here is the real estate transfer declaration that I found. What we find here is the location. We see that it's 2 parcels sold together for a total of 118.82 acres, and we have the property tax ID numbers right here. It's important to know those when we want to look up the productivity index. And we can see that this is a farm. There are more pages to this, but these are the ones that I wanted to get. And the farms, those 118 acres, sold for $268,000. Now, one of the things that I wanted to point out with this one is that no, the property was not advertised for sale. Now, keep in mind, this farm was sold back in June of 2011. Farmland prices increased 18% in 2011. They've also increased in 2012, although we don't have the statistics more. But also notice this was not a property advertised for sale, so it was a less than arm's length transaction possibly. It's kind of important to know that, but you know that it's probably going to maybe be undervalued a little bit, maybe not. It depends entirely on the situation, but it was a sale, and it's the one that we're going to use. Also, when we look up the tax card information, and by the way, here's the link for this transaction, I looked up the numbers and went to the property record search. I just select it by parcel number, put the PIN number in, clicked on the farms, and here's the farm card that came up. Remember, the county tax assessor uses Bulletin 810. The highest PI for Bulletin 810 is 130, and that's a muscatine soil. However, in this area, most of the top end soils are going to be in the mid 120 range. Notice that this one is actually for Champaign County quite low. Here we have, let me look here, Martinsville Silt Loam. It's a 570 C2. The C designates that it's fairly significantly sloped, 5 to 10%. 2 means moderate erosion, and the adjusted PI is a 92. Here we have a D2, which would be significant slopes, probably shouldn't be farmed, and the PI is 86. So one of the reasons why this farm is low, was sold for a low price, is the fact that it's a lot of the ground on this is marginal ground. It does have some drummer, which is a PI of 127, which on Bulletin 810 is good, but it only had a little less than 3 acres of that on there. So you want to do a workup on this farm and get the average productivity index. I suggest you do this on a farm that you're doing in comparison wise, but if you want to keep up with this and don't have a comparable farm and you want to use ours, that's okay as well. Once you determine the average PI for the comparison farms, typically we want to do 3, and I think I did leave that out, and I want to go ahead and type that in there. You can do more, but if you do less than 3, you're probably not going to get accurate information. And again, I would try to find ones that were actually advertised for sale, but it's not absolutely necessary. What's more important is to get one that was sold near your farm. Location is important, has a similar productivity index, and has a similar percent tillable. It's somewhat important to get one that was sold at about the same time you're doing the analysis. However, as I mentioned, we can go back and look at the ISPFMRA data and adjust farmland values accordingly. This one was sold in 2011 that we're looking at. We know prices increased according to the society by 18%, so if you had a value of local farms at the end of 2010, you would add 9% or half of that 18% back to it. We also know that the first half of 2012, farmland values increased 5%. We don't have the data yet for the rest of 2012 at the time of this lesson. Okay, so what we're going to do next then is to get the average PI for the farms, divide the land price by the average PI to get your average price per PI point. You want to average several comparison farm PIs together and multiply the farm PI by the price per PI. Here's the example that we're looking at. Comparable number 1, average PI of 120, sold for $8,000 an acre. Farm number 2, average PI of 125, sold for $10,000. Farm number 3, average PI, sold for $9,000 an acre. Now keep in mind, if you're using comparison sales, you're going to have the data in the form of PIs from Bulletin 810. Unless you're using something from a real estate agent for comparisons, and they're going to have Bulletin 811, you're going to have to adjust the soils accordingly between Bulletin 810 and 811. Remember, 811 is always lower, or 810 is always lower than is 811. 811 is for optimum productivity. 810 is for average productivity. I wish there was only one system, but there are two, and I can't do anything about that. So again, we have the average PI. Looking at the numbers right here, 120, 125, and 115, the average is 120. And they sold for $8,000, $10,000, and $9,000 per acre, so that if you average that together, it's $9,000. You take the $9,000 divided by the average PI of 120, you come up with $75 per PI point. Then we take the PI of our farm, of 122, take that times the average PI, average price per PI point, we come up with 9,150. Keep in mind, you might have to adjust for time. The other thing that we haven't talked about, that we more or less skipped over, would be buildings. And I wanted to take the time to note that buildings vary too much by location to really get into discussing it much here. With the exception that, for an example, if you have a house on your property and the comparison farms do not have a house on the property, and say the house is worth $100,000, you're going to want to subtract that off your farm or add it to the value of the other farms. Other buildings are the same way. Machine sheds vary by location on their value. Also keep in mind, most farms don't have very good records on what the tile records are, but they may have, or you may have that information as well. Old barns and some hog confinement facilities actually decrease the value of the farm because those have to be potentially removed or have expensive upkeep. And as I go back, make sure that the comparison farms are similar in percent tillable, average PI, and for time. You also need to take into account the buildings. I'll be very happy to assist anyone with this assignment if you ask. You must understand what you are investing in, or what you are invested in, and what it's worth, and I'm very willing to help. So look over it. Please try to do the examples. I still want to go back to lesson 1.2. It's so important to get the average PI for your farm and to understand that, because we're going to need that when we look at cash rent data, which is coming up in unit number 2. Any questions? Please give me a call. This concludes today's lesson on getting comparable sales from your local county tax assessor or county recorder. I know this might have been kind of difficult for some of you, but this will be the most difficult lessons in this particular unit. And actually, if you did 1.2, we're past the most difficult point. It's also important to have this information so that when we go to comparing our farm to others to determine cash rents, even if you're in a crop share, it's important to know what you could get for cash rent. This information is just vital to know and understand. If you have any questions, please give me a call. Again, phone number 217-586-3894 or kwbrooks@bksolutionsonline.com, and I look forward to hearing from you. See you later. Bye.